Tell them about themselves. These are the wise words I received from my mentor and beloved friend, Reverend Kim Wildchesky, last year. Of all the wisdom and truths I learned from her, these are the words I hear most often in my head when I sit and ponder what to preach on Sunday, what good word to bring to my people. Tell them about themselves. So on this Sunday of Memorial Day, when we wished to be at the beach, to be grilling with a party of friends, when we expected life to look quite different than it does this weekend, so much different than it has for most of our lifetimes, when these expectations are also intertwined with disappointment and grief, I wanted to share with you the story of John Murray from our history, our Unitarian Universalist history. I wanted to tell you about yourselves. Telling stories is a way to remember the legacy of human life, to recall the ways in which we've made meaning for all the years gone by. The most common of these stories, creation myths, the stories of how we began. The Greeks have the Titans and the Hopis have Spider Grandmother. Us UUs, we have John Murray. He is one of our creation myths. And myths, they belong to communities. They belong to the group of intimates with whom we tell each other about ourselves. But myths are often short on detail and heavy on the silver linings. They tend to gloss over the harder parts in a rush to get to the happier bits. And that's the version that Kate gave to you just a few minutes before. It's the one we teach our children in religious education. But the version of John Murray that holds potential for this moment now is the one that emphasizes the hard parts, the one that brings to life the details. So I've written a slightly different version of his journey to share with you now. He had been on the ship for 6 weeks. His once new clothing is ragged and brown from sweat and grime. He was seasick that first week, so there's vomit too. His eyebrows are crusted with salt and his feet no longer fit his shoes. They are so swollen. The weeks have been long, but honestly, anything is better than the life John was leaving behind. Grief has left him hollow. Debtor's prison had left him humiliated. He feels profound confusion. His family is gone. No one understands his beliefs, and nothing in his life is getting better. He doesn't even recognize himself. So John almost laughs when the ship runs aground. Of course, why would he expect anything different? Life would continue here in America just as it had back in England, one painful trial after another. So when the opportunity to go to shore presented itself, he said yes. A lightened ship might be lifted with the high tide, so he accompanied the small dinghy to shore. His legs almost gave out at steady land. It had been a long time, and the earth felt as if it was undulating. He wandered into the woods just off the beach and stumbled upon a clearing, and then a stranger appeared, one whose warmth felt out of sync with the rest of life. It was Thomas Potter, who throws open his arms and says, "I have been waiting for you." Potter showed Murray the chapel, built with his own hands. Logs he felled and hewed himself, notched and fitted tight. He was a farmer, but not a particularly successful one. His insistence that John was the one was a little off-putting. He seemed unbalanced, but Murray couldn't deny him. Potter needed a reverend to preach a gospel of universal salvation. Murray believed in universal salvation. Potter needed a reverend who preached that God's love was available to all. Murray believed that God's love was available to all. Potter's pulpit was empty. Murray decided to fill it. So, same idea. The Spirit moved, and John was brought to the shores of America to preach a gospel of universalism. But in this version, we might see ourselves just a bit more clearly. We might see how this creation myth is as much about the past, our past, as it is about our present. These past weeks, this pandemic of monstrous proportions has been an odyssey, not unlike Murray's. Like him, we too have been out to sea for weeks. We've become accustomed to the same vista, day in and day out, juggling fear and boredom, unsure of what is promised when we arrive at the end. Just like John Murray, we too have reached a new shore, the cautious and unprecedented reopening of our world, of drawing up new boundaries and finding new centers of gravity. We had just started to get our sea legs, just started to adjust to new rhythms and new ways of coping during the voyage of quarantine. We got used to life on the boat, and upon arrival to the shore, our legs might be jelly, and we need to recalibrate all over again, forced to find a new center of gravity all over again. But John Murray's story and ours today echo the long cherished wisdom of Octavia Butler, who wrote, "Change is the one unavoidable, irresistible, ongoing reality of the universe." Change is unavoidable and irresistible. We have been changed by this time, just as we will continue to change, continue to adapt, continue one day at a time. Just when we feel on the verge of despair, just when we feel resigned to a future that holds the same view day in and day out, the dinghy arrives on shore, our center of gravity adjusts, and we find ourselves in a clearing where someone gestures with open arms to say, "We have been waiting for you here." This is the John Murray I want to impress upon us today. The one who was seasick, brought to his knees by grief, humiliated by society, alone and distraught. I want this to be the one you think of when his name is mentioned, because this is what was universal about his story, not just his theology, but the fact that he lived a real life, a life that was miserable and joyful, painful and celebratory, a disappointment and a revelation. His story is ours now to claim as much as it ever was. Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote an epic poem about another seafaring hero, Ulysses, who, like Murray, endured a long string of trials to reach his destination. Tennyson concludes the final verse with these words: "We are not now that strength which in old days moved heaven and earth. That which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. One equal temper of heroic hearts made weak by time and fate, yes, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield." Just like Murray, who was unyielding in his belief that we are bound for heaven, destined for good things, this is our creation myth, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves, that which we are, we are. As Unitarian Universalists, we are called to live this life without yielding. When it gets messy, we dig deeper, we nurture connection, and we grow our souls. We do not yield, but in the tradition of John Murray, we trudge onward, knowing that to be alive is a blessing, and the messiness is part of that the choices we make in this life, these choices matter. And so we gather here on Sundays to fortify ourselves for the choices we must make. And what or who, you might ask, informed Murray's choices? Do we see Murray as urged by something greater, something which conspired to get him out of the prison cell, onto the gangplank of the ship, across the Atlantic, onto the dinghy, onto the shore, into the pulpit and the arms of Thomas Potter? Do we choose to believe something providential intervened on Murray's behalf, which kept the opportunities coming? Do we find comfort in the notion that something providential might intervene on our behalf these days? That there exists a love holding all we love, a greater, more magnificent force which pushes us towards our intended life? Or do we see it as something that was within Murray, that small voice that belonged only to him, the mind which conjured dreams and arranged the ticket, that packed the trunk, the self-determination which brought him to the threshold of Potter's Chapel? Are we comforted here by the notion that we too possess that small voice and the courage of conviction? That there exists more love somewhere and that we are going to keep on. We are going to choose to keep on until we find it? Either way, we are saved. Either way, by providence or personhood, we can rest assured that good things await us. Either way, we refuse to yield to the pain of life and instead are called to dig deeper, to push to the next chapter. This is also the majesty of universalism. We are intended for good things. I cannot believe I have the good fortune to stand before you today and tell you that no matter what you do, no matter what is done or to you, you are not damned. You are not forsaken. Like Oprah, I want to cry out and point to each of your faces. You are saved, and you are saved. You are saved, and you are saved. But the truth is, right now, we need to hear this. Especially now, amidst the uncertainty of this time, amidst all that seems unknowable. I imagine at some point in the future, this scenario we find ourselves in will become a myth of sorts too. We will gloss over the hardship and the pain in favor of the good things we learned, the better things that came of it all. But not yet. And when it comes time to tell our own myths about this time, I want us to remember the importance that Murray's life wasn't in the triumphs, it was in the trials. It was in the way he had faith and took heart. We are destined to live this story again and again, and as time passes, our hearts may be made weak by time and fate, but we, Unitarian Universalists, will not yield. We urge one another, we urge ourselves on, knowing that the salvific love of universalism means this life matters. Our choices matter, and the good things wait for us on the shores of new worlds. Blessed be, and amen.